What does the Elvis NBC TV special, the Elvis movie Change of Habit, and Elvis' first appearance at the Las Vegas International Hotel all have in common? Well, our guest was there, and she's going to tell us all about it. My name is Rob. I'm the president of the Always Elvis fan club. I'm welcoming today Ann Moses. I'm glad you could join us here, what I call Studio E. We're going to talk about you as a journalist, a writer, and all the people you've rubbed elbows with, including one of our favorites, Elvis Presley. When did you first even know who Elvis Presley was?
Certainly, with the other young people. I mean, I don't know if I was 10 or 12 or how old I was, but I think we first saw him on Ed Sullivan because it was our, which was, you probably know that year in your head.
Right.
When he was first on Ed Sullivan.
Right, 56 and 57.
Because I didn't see him on the doors. He went, my family, every Sunday night, we watched Ed Sullivan, had dinner on TV trays. That was the one night of the week we didn't sit down as a family at the table, very Leave It to Beaverish. And my brother and I have an older brother that's 18 months older than me. And we just both freaked out. We just were loving it. And I immediately went out and bought, a single. And then I asked for an Elvis skirt for Christmas.
Oh, yes.
And my parents thought that was a bit overboard. They were okay with Elvis by all means. But they did get me an Elvis scarf. They thought, I guess that was within their budget. So
yeah,
I got my first Elvis memento.
Yeah, well, they did have a lot of merchandising back there, and just to have something with Elvis's name was probably a good keepsake, right?
Oh yeah, of course I don't have it anymore, but but I like so many. I feel when he went off to Germany, went in the service and all that, and and then the British invasion came along. That I was totally swept up in that, and I didn't think about Elvis again for quite a while.
Right. Before we talk about your involvement in Tiger Beat magazine, tell us a little bit about that path for Ann getting to enjoying writing.
Well, I struggled with writing about 6th grade. I really was having trouble. And for the only time my mom did this was she said, okay, you're having trouble getting started. I'm going to write the first sentence and you have to write it from there. And it was just that little step of her breaking the ice for me. And then I was more comfortable doing my school reports and writing. And by junior high, I decided to sign up to be what they called student reporters for the city newspaper. I grew up just 2 miles from Disneyland in Anaheim. And every Friday afternoon in that edition of the paper, they would have a student page. So the student reporters from different schools would tell about what was going on with a sports team or somebody that won the science fair, whatever it was. And I just thought, I couldn't believe I was being paid. And I was paid 15 cents an inch, big money. And so I just turned out that I was really, I wrote long articles, let's just put it that way. and however much they were willing to print, then that's what I got paid for. So then in high school, I didn't work on the school paper, but I became the yearbook editor. So there was still that organizing, and I wouldn't say so much, there wasn't a great deal of writing in the yearbook, but the really, one of the seeds was planted for me in the way of organizing it and presenting it, which I would find out later really lent itself to my work at Tiger Beat.
Right.
So then junior college, I was on the student newspaper, and I became a co-editor in my second year. And I thought that was really cool. But then away from school, from 15 and a half until 19, I worked at Disneyland, which was, that was the coolest job in the entire world. And of course, one time I got to meet Walt Disney. Now, when you become an employee at Disneyland, you have to go through Disneyland University. And so in Disneyland University, I learned that if you ever have an occasion to encounter Walt Disney, you either call him Walt or Uncle Walt. You never call him Mr. Disney, because one of his policies for the entire park, and I don't know if it was true for the studio as well, was that Disneyland was a first name organization. So that one morning I was opening up work early. I worked at Sunkissed, the juice stand in Adventureland, right across the street from the Jungle Cruise. And so one morning he liked to come out to the park early in the morning and go on a certain ride. And he would critique that ride. He would say, "Oh, let's make this part a little more dramatic or a little more startling," or, he would always wanted to be improving things. So I saw him come off the jungle ride, and he was with a couple of supervisors, and he came over and said, "Good morning, Ann," and I kind of went, like, how do you know my name? And of course I had my name tag on because everybody at Disneyland wore a name tag. Sure. And so I said, "How can I help you this morning?" And he said, "I'd like an orange juice, please." And, I was very nervous because that was a really big deal. And so I managed to say, large or small. And so he said, "Thank you very much." And then, because I was just kind of so astonished to be talking to him, I blurted out, Uncle Walt, I wrote 2 articles for the employee newsletter." And he says, "Oh, so you're a writer?" And I said, "Well, I guess so." And he said, "Well, keep it up. You never know where that's going to take you." Well, it wasn't long after that. I was also working, when I wasn't working at Disneyland, I was a volunteer usher at a theater in the Round called Melodyland across the street from Disneyland. And, I adored going to see the musicals. They would put on Music Man and Annie Get Your Gun and all those old musicals. And, some of the people that were performing were pretty big stars, in Broadway and live entertainment. One night I went to work. It was in the summer of 65. And there was this rock and roll lineup. And I hadn't paid any attention to who was performing at all. It was like I got off work at Disneyland. I went over to Melodyland. And the headliners were the Dave Clark Five. Here I was, after seeing the Beatles picture in Life magazine in 64, it was like, oh my gosh. And there were a couple of smaller acts on the bill. There was a duo called Sonny and Cher, and, a couple of other groups. And so for sure I was going to stay for that show. And I mean, the minute I saw them start to perform, it was in my mind, I said, I have got to interview these guys. Started talking to their road manager, who became a friend. And so I said, and he said, they're doing 2 shows. They're going to eat dinner in between. There's just no time. And I said, but I have this assignment for my college paper and blah, blah, blah. And finally he said, well, I tell you what, if you come back before the second show, I'll give you 5 minutes with them. So he wrote me a note, please allow this young woman to come in the back door, because back then nobody had the big lanyards with the backstage passes. I mean, it was just, they had zero experience with rock and roll groups. Mm-hmm. And so I rushed home because it was only 2 miles. And when I got back, the note got me backstage, which was really cool. So I go in and here they are, all in their dressing room, and the dressing room has banners in it and photo albums that girls have brought and all this. And so I started interviewing Mike Smith. And then pretty soon the other guys in the group, including Dave Clark, were kind of gathered around to hear what he was saying. And then I got to interview each one of them. So it turned into a half-hour interview. Nice. And I'm telling you, it was just, I went home just so excited. Right. And so I wrote up my story because, I was the co-editor of the paper, so I knew I could put it in the entertainment pages. That led to a phone call from a young woman in the same city. And she and her mother were producing a weekly music newspaper that was just like four little pages. And then they sold it for a nickel every Friday at music stores around Southern California. And they said, well, we'd sure like you to come and write for us. And, there was no pay, but it was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of put a new spin on what I was doing, because they started sending me up to South Los Angeles, because it was called Rhythm and News. What they intended to mostly write about was rhythm and blues. Okay. So they were sending me up to South Los Angeles, and I was seeing people like the Miracles, James Brown, Tina Turner when she was still with Ike. And I was interviewing all these people. And it was just incredible, because these Black artists, they were not all that accustomed to being interviewed and getting press attention. And they had no idea what Rhythm and News was, but they were like so nice to me that you want to interview me, that's great. I mean, even James Brown. Wow. I mean, that he thought it was a big deal that I was interviewing him just kind of blew my mind. And he was the sweetest man. One other girl that also wrote for free for them, occasionally she and I would go up to Hollywood together. So one day she said to me, wouldn't it be great to be paid for doing this? And I said, well, that would be the ultimate. And she said, I'd like to go to work for Tiger Beat. And I said, what's Tiger Beat? Because their first issue was published in September of '65. After she said that, I went to the drugstore on the way home and I bought my first issue. And it was probably their first or second issue. I had interviewed the Beach Boys, and they were their PR person was Derek Taylor, who used to be the PR person for the Beatles. So here's this guy with this British accent, and he had the Byrds and Paul Revere and the Raiders were on his roster. And so once I met him, then I always took copies of my articles and dropped them off to show them that it was published, because little Rhythm and News, how would they ever see that at the time? Sure. And so when I was in his office, it was late December of '65, and I said, Derek, do you know the people at Tiger Beat? And he goes, yeah, I write a monthly column for Tiger Beat. I said, oh, that's great. I said, do you suppose you could introduce me, to the editor? Because I'd love to introduce myself. And,
Mhm.
I thought maybe I'll do a freelance article or two. And so he picked up the phone. It was like 4 o'clock on a Friday, and his offices were on Sunset Boulevard. And he called up and he said, can you go over right now? And I said, yes. So here I am. I don't have copies of articles, or I don't have anything with me, like a resume or anything else. But I go over and I interview with the editor that was Ralph Binner. He was one of the ones who started Tiger Beat. So they've been publishing for like 4 months. And he said, well, we'd really like to have you as a writer, but we have to see what your writing style is like. And he said, so if you'll write 2 articles that you've written, but in Tiger Beat style. Well, at that moment, I didn't really know what Tiger Beat style was. So I got home, I worked all weekend, and I poured through the Tiger Beat I had, and I saw that they were putting lots of extra little details in. And like, oh, he had the bluest eyes,
Mhm.
blah. And I mean, as a journalist, the interviews I had done before I didn't include that type of thing.
Right.
So I did them in Tiger Beat style. I took him up the next Monday. It was still December. And he said, how would you like to start working part-time? And so I was hooked. And then, of course, I started working full-time in June. And that's when I quit, working summers and weekends at Disneyland. I worked my final grad night.
So basically, you skipped out on going to school because you
Yep.
had the job that you wanted. Bring up a picture here, and is
There I
this
am.
where's this? What time period is this at?
So that had to be, like January-ish, February of 66, because I started in January 66.
Right. I noticed that you had a connection also with the Monkees quite a bit. Was that later on, or was that during that same time period?
Well, the Monkees were introduced. I mean, their first show aired in September of 66. But yes, they had a cast party that I was invited to before it opened. And then I was also invited to ride on what they called the last train to Clarksville. They had planned for it was a radio station promotion, and people could send in entries, and they were chosen to ride the Union Pacific train. And they had the mayor had turned that into Clarksville for the day.
Mm-hmm.
But that, I met Mickey, and I only met Mickey that night. And I had met Davey at the preview, which was just a few days prior to that. It was really great. And of course, they became the sensation for the next couple of years. They sold magazines. Of course, they became superstars in their own right, and and performed all over the world until they didn't anymore.
Yeah. No, I got to see them several times. Obviously not in that time era, but they performed for many, many years after.
Oh, yes. Even
always.
their reunion shows were great too. I mean, the feeling of being in that audience for people who maybe they didn't see them when they were younger, or
Mhm.
maybe they didn't see them until they were, on MTV or Saturday mornings or whatever. And it's just like they have multi-generational fans, and those reunion shows I thought were just fabulous.
Yeah. And you made a comment earlier when we were talking about Elvis Presley, which we're going to get to here. You mentioned that you forgot about Elvis during the 60s. And Elvis's career was heavily into movies at the time. Maybe other people forgot about Elvis too. There obviously he had his diehard fans that went to his movies, but how did you re-engage with Elvis?
Well, it was the marketing person at RCA Records. His name was Graylin Landon, and he was a young man. He was very driven, but in a really soft way. He, it was his job to promote RCA artists. And, Tiger Beat, very shortly after it, hit the newsstands, kept growing and growing and growing. It wasn't the number one magazine because 16 magazine had been published for many years prior. So it was more well known, had better placement. But we were getting more readership all the time. And so he reached out to me and he said, Elvis is doing this movie or something, and I'd love to send you, or he did this movie, I don't know which one it would have been, but he said, I'd really like to send you tickets to the opening. Now, the opening meant it was the first night it was shown somewhere in Hollywood. It wasn't, they never did red carpet or any of those things or had any celebrities turn out. But for about a year, he would send me these tickets. And I had friends that really liked Elvis, so he'd send me new tickets, but that was only every X number of months. And one day he called and he said, I'd really love to have you go out and see Elvis's office at MGM. He said, it's really cool. You'll really like it. And I said, okay, that sounds all right, Mm-hmm. And I mean, I wasn't personally that enthused. Mm-hmm. But even that day, I have to tell you, I was overwhelmed at his office because when you go in, it's at MGM Studios, you're walking around, the back lot, you go into the office and it is every single surface, walls, ceiling, floors, every surface is covered with Elvis pictures and different ones. And it's just, you just can't even, I mean, if a true Elvis fan could go in there, I think they would expire. It was just mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so shortly after I came back from that, I got another call. Graylin called and he said, I'm going to send over some tickets and you really need to go to this. It's a special event. And he goes, just trust me, you need to go. But it's not like I had extra heads up. I just knew it was a taping. Graylin wanted me to go, I'll go. We walked in, we were seated in the second to the top row at the back. And just before all this was going to start, who comes walking up for the row behind us but Priscilla? She sits down directly behind us and her knees were bumping into my friend Tony. And he just thought that was the biggest moment of his life.
Touched by Priscilla, huh?
I mean, she was gorgeous. She had changed her hair from the bouffant hairstyle and it was down and long. And I mean, like very current. And she looked like $1 million, and she was so petite. And it was just to see her up close was really, really cool. So the thing proceeded. They showed us a few things on the screens, like musical numbers he had performed and already, were in the can. So we had a feel for it. But we didn't know what was going to be coming, what we would be watching. And just before Elvis came out, kind of the moderator, the guy taking care of the audience said, we're going to pick a few people to come down and sit on this little stage. Well, that little stage was the little, probably 10 foot by 10 foot that Elvis was in his black leather suit and the guys were sitting around playing and where he was performing. Well, he chose me. I don't know why or how, but oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. So here I am, his voice. And then later when I would go to his Vegas shows, and to this day, I feel the same way. Mm-hmm. That voice is just incomparable. And then, of course, when I saw the the way that when the production came out, and I saw myself in one shot, they even superimposed my face looking up at him while he's singing my favorite Elvis song, "Can't Help Falling in Love."
Yes.
And I mean, thank you, editors. Of course, I accepted the invitation because I was invited by their promotions people.
Okay.
So, and that was the night that the press were invited, of course. And it was also the night that after his performance, he did the live press conference. And someone had come down and given me a heads up after the curtains closed, and they said, "You've got to get over to such and such a room," going crazy. And I hightailed it out of there and got in the front row of the press conference. So when Elvis came in, of course, and his dad, it was just so cool. And he just answered questions, and he was so casual, and he appeared to be just utterly comfortable. And, he so rarely did interviews, that this was a chance for everybody to hear things, not Colonel Tom telling you what's going on, but to hear Elvis, and he made jokes. He was still so keyed up from his performance, but that just made him, I think, feel so comfortable because he was just filled with confidence of how he had mesmerized the audience. And so he was feeling really, really good. And of course, that's when I had that picture taken, was that night, August 1st, 1969. So I got to have that picture with him. And there's another one that someone shot, and I'm just like looking up at him with my mouth open, just like, oh. But I also, the next morning, I went to, again, I can't remember his name, but the marketing guy for the International, who was the one who invited all the press there. And I said, I really would like to take pictures, and of course there were no cameras allowed in there. Yep. And I said, I'll be, discreet. You won't know I'm there. And he said, well, I tell you what, you can shoot pictures from the balcony at the 12 o'clock show. So I spent the rest of I got my article to the mail, the post office. And then I spent the rest of the day trying to find a long lens because I had a 135 millimeter lens, but that wasn't going to cut it. So I found a photo store that I could rent a 200 millimeter lens. And that enabled me to be up in the balcony and shoot pictures. And of course, I got about, 60 really great pictures. They're from far away, but they're, they were published in Tiger Beat. They've since been published on some of his reissues and CD sets that Sony produced. Then they bought those photos from me. I still have those to this day, my color slides, and they've been digitized, of course. But that was so cool too, because the first night he wore his black jumpsuit, and the night I was shooting pictures, he was in an all white jumpsuit. And, he was just as fabulous as the night before. And those people got an incredible show, but I just was like, I'll just sit up there taking pictures. And that was super neat.
Yeah. In 69, then you saw opening night, then you saw a midnight show, and were you able to continue and watch more concerts, or did you have to go back to work and do different things? How much were you involved in Elvis's performances in the first year?
Well, I didn't go again for a year. Okay. And at that point in time, I had been contacted by Dennis Saunders, who was producing Elvis. That's the way it is. Not producing it. He was the director. And he explained to me that there were going to be different fans that they were talking to, interspersed with him getting ready for the show, and then he was going to film the show. And so he came to my office at Tiger Beat, and I was nervous, so nervous, because I was not comfortable talking on camera then. I was the behind the camera type of that. I felt like that was my role. And but he managed to get some good sound bites, and he shot me walking down the hall to the artist's office and working with the artist, to kind of give you a sense of place. And he used a couple of the quotes in the final cut. But he also, because when we were just casually talking, I said, "Oh, I belong to this Elvis group. The guys all drink beers and then they all imitate Elvis." And he said, "Oh, I'd like to come film your party." And so we were having one of those parties down in Redondo Beach. And so he filmed them all, lip syncing to Elvis songs, and all of us sitting there, kind of grooving to the music and stuff. And it was really cute. It ended up, he didn't use that in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But what he did do after he had filmed opening night in Vegas, because I was invited to that. And of course, because he knew I was going to be in the movie as one of the fans that speaks on camera, he had arranged for us to have front row seats. And at that particular show, when Elvis came out, he came over to me first and kissed me. And that was awesome. Then he kissed my girlfriend, and and then of course the show was just absolutely fabulous, because he was even cooler a year later, with the karate chops, and so we saw several of those shows. But shortly after that, Dennis Saunders invited us he said, "You can bring X number of people." And he was going to show me some of the footage that had been shot for it. So here we are at MGM in a screening room with a theater-sized screen, a full-size theater screen. And then the shot of Elvis coming out on stage and kissing me first, that was on 35 millimeter film, and it was on that screen. And I was just, that also didn't make it in the film. But, I had the experience, and it was awesome. And it was a real kiss. It wasn't a peck. It was a great kiss, a really great kiss.
I bet.
So we went back and saw him after that too. It was just a great time. There were lots of cool things going on. But then I got the one other experience with Elvis. Elvis was filming Change of Habit with Mary Tyler Moore.
Okay.
And I said, I'd really like to go out on the set. And so they arranged it with the publicist for the film. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to take you out 2 days." And he said, "I'll take you out. You can't write anything down. You can't take any pictures. You can't talk to Elvis. You're just there to observe." And I said, "That works for me. No problem." So the first day, they were doing the outdoor scene where they're singing the song to the little girl on the carousel. So at the end of that day, that was a Friday, and the film publicist said, "Okay, I'll pick you up on Monday morning." And on that day, they were filming inside what was the health clinic, I think, and he was singing Rubberneckin'. It was so interesting because he just had to keep filming it over and over and over, because you want this angle and that angle. And
Right.
The Blossoms were singing behind him. And he was having so much fun. And I noticed it was really interesting. Whenever he would take a break, no one was supposed to approach him. And he was pretty much on his own. If he walked over and talked to one of his buddies, that was fine. But it was kind of known on the set that you leave Elvis alone. Well, on one of those breaks, after he'd been doing rubbernecking over and over and over again, and he walked over to me, and I said hi, and I was so taken aback because I didn't expect that to happen. I mean, he had warned me, this is not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so Elvis walked over and he said, well, I've been seeing you standing around on the set. And I said, yes, I've been observing, and boy, that song is sure good. I don't know what came out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, but you look familiar to me. And I said, well, I don't know what that could be. I said, but my face was superimposed with yours because I was at the comeback special. And he said, that must be it. And I mean, him saying that to me,
Oh,
wow. I mean, what can you say? I was just like, oh my God. And then he said, oh, I guess I better get back to work. And he walked away. And it was like, oh my God, I got to stand this close to Elvis and look into his eyes, and talk to him. And it was like, how did I even speak?
Right. The 70s happened. You saw Elvis several times in Las Vegas. Did you go into any of the later, like 75, 76, or did you just go?
No. As you'll read in my book, I left Tiger Beat in 1972.
Okay.
And kind of complicated. It's all in the book. But as a result, I moved to Northern California. I was tuned out on entertainment. If it wasn't something on a sitcom that I would watch on TV when I came home from work, then I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I was just went from 100 to 0, in my association with Hollywood and everything else.
Mm-hmm. And prior to that, you've met, I seen Marie Osmond when she was young, right? You met Marie?
Oh, right. The Osmonds started really getting popular in the 70s. In fact, the one time I went to Vegas and saw Elvis, I had been invited by Frank Sinatra, no less, with an engraved invitation for real, which I didn't keep. Dummy that I am. And it was inviting it to his daughter's opening, Nancy Sinatra's opening at Caesar's Palace. And I missed opening night because I wanted to see Elvis. And then I went the next night to see the Osmonds, and they were so fabulous because, they were so multi-talented. I mean, playing their own instruments and performing. And here Donnie, he was, 13 years old, and he's dancing on stage with Nancy Sinatra, their vocals were so fabulous. I mean, I was impressed with them from the first time I ever saw them. I saw them after that at the Forum in Los Angeles. To see them in that setting, and I know Elvis had been to see that show too, because they had pictures taken with him and everything when he came over to see Nancy Sinatra and the Osmonds, and that was pretty cool.
You also met Andy Williams, right?
Oh yeah, because he was appearing in the British. They have an annual I think it's called the Royal Variety Show. And so I was writing a weekly column. It was called Hollywood Calling in the New Musical Express, and they wanted an interview with Andy Williams. In the meantime, I got a really interesting interview with him, and he was talking about how he was trying to do more hip songs, and he was trying to pay attention to the new younger audiences and all this. And he was Andy Williams. So, I mean, you can just tell what a nice, easygoing guy he was. And he was exactly like that during my whole interview. So I got a great interview for the British newspaper, and it was all good.
You have a book, and obviously in our little conversation today, there's there's going to be too much details of what that is. So, when did you pen Meow and
Uh,
Your Groovy Life at Tiger Beat?
well, I published it in 2017. It took me 5 years to write because I was still, employed as in an orthodontic office.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do writing jobs after I left Tiger Beat, but that's a whole nother story in itself. And so I was still working when I published it in 20. Well, no, but then I left that last job. I retired in 2016 and it was published in 2017. And people are still buying it today, which I'm just, thrills me no end. It just, it really warms my heart that I've reached so many people by taking them back to their preteens or their teen years, or it's the best feeling, and taking them behind the scenes with me and what those experiences were, because not everyone was like fabulous. There were a few that were kind of heartbreaking, but that's what life's like.
Yeah.
So I have no regrets. Let's
Yeah.
put it that way.
Yeah. Well, you don't only have Elvis memories. You have celebrity memories. You have your writing, your writing to go back on.
Oh, I do. I do.
And you've documented. We've talked here, and we probably only got a slice of the pie of what happened with Anne. Your book is available. Is it on through your website or?
My website, which is annmoses.com.
Okay.
And also on Amazon. You can get an ebook or a paperback. And so you can read it instantly if you'd like.
Okay.
But it's called Meow, My Groovy Life with Tiger Beat's Teen Idols.
Wonderful. And all those little tidbits that we talked about with the Osmonds and the David Clark 5, and you can get even a little more detail if you check out Anne's book, visit the website and or Amazon. And we'll have to get. I haven't read it, Anne, so I'm about to do that. I think I'm gonna have to give it a read.
Well, that would be great.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure I will. That kind of stuff just is groovy, as they say back in those days.
It is. It absolutely is.
Well, Anne, I really appreciate all the time you spent here with us, and
well, it's been my pleasure. I've enjoyed
stories not only about Elvis but some other celebrities and things we didn't know, and we really look forward to getting into your book. And for people that haven't read it yet, I'm sure many have, but for those that don't, they have that opportunity as well. So I want to thank you for spending some time with me today.
Well, thank you as well.